There we go. I think the video's on now. Hi, Megan.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good. Very good.
So are you doing one of these once a week?
Yeah, pretty much. Although this week I'm doing 2 this week. I typically try to do one once a week, but so July is like my off month. So I'm recording a bunch in July to create my like role to start forward to start releasing in August.
Okay.
Because I was like at the end of June, like I was getting ready to go on vacation. Like I just wasn't filming a whole lot. But this works well because it's like mid-year, then I can jam them in July, and then I have a nice I like to have 3 or 4 in my bank, so I'm never panicked any week about what I'm releasing that week.
So how much of your time are you spending practicing law versus doing this?
It's about 60% is like actual legal work, and my other 40% is podcast and marketing, because this is like my marketing bank.
Okay.
So rather than like traveling to lunches and dinners and doing all that nonsense, I do this instead. And I find it works better for me. I think I can have much more meaningful relationship development with people than I can have at a conference or at like a lunch. And it's much more like economical for my time and just dollars. It just has worked better for me. Like I hated traveling because while there's like the fun aspect of it, it was so annoying. Like it just
particularly if you've got children. I mean, as you do. I mean, it's hard. Yeah. Cause I'm traveling a lot now. I was in Los Angeles doing some stuff last week, and then I was in Chicago, and then I was in Florida. I mean, it's just, my kids are grown, nobody's, and my wife has seen me enough over the last 39 years. She doesn't necessarily cry when I go away.
Yeah. I will say like COVID really helped me out in shifting like my marketing focus. Cause once when travel was shut down, I felt this sense of relief. I was like, oh, thank God. Like I can't travel right now. Because it's nice in a way, like, oh sure, night away, like not having to put the kids to bed one night, but like the prep work before I leave, and when I come back, and then there's flight delays, and it's just such a pain. So
and the flight delays have become, we need to assume we're going to have them. Like I had a nonstop to Los Angeles on Thursday, and I needed to be there to do what I was going to do on Friday morning, and I thought, if this flight cancels, I'm SOL. What I learned when I got to the airport is that same flight the day before canceled. So I just got lucky, but you can't leave 3 days ahead of time to try to get somewhere, because anyway, I claim to be no different than anybody else. I mean, it's hard for everybody.
Yeah. So to answer your question though, I personally moved to a different billing model this year that I am purposely, I'm on a lower billing model because I do so much of this marketing, and I make so many leads and connections that I can then pass them on to people in the firm as they fit like their personality or practice area or whatever. Cause I'm not a jack of all trades. Like I don't do coverage. I don't do comp. Like I don't do those things, but I have people that do. So I have a larger funnel. So I kind of make the connection. And if I have one associate who, she's like my construction and comp person, and I bring her on a lot of podcasts because she's great on podcasts, and she's a great attorney, and she's really good to connect. She's like really personable and stuff too. So like if I have good leads, I might bring them in, but I'll pass them on to her. And if business comes in, like she benefits, I benefit. Like I don't need the full load of that at all. Like,
right.
I'd rather spread it out and just have more business come in. So it's worked. I mean, I've had some naysayers being like, oh, like digital marketing, like it doesn't work, and they like the old school way, and like that's fine for some people, but this just works much better for me.
You bet. Yeah, it just makes sense.
And it's way more fun.
Well, yeah, and for you and for other people, it would be torture. I mean, it dovetails with your natural skill set, so you got to take what you do naturally and just do it better. So That's great.
Yeah. Like that's the thing. Like I have another partner who like anytime he would come on this podcast with me, he'd stress out about it. And like, and I was like, well, that, then that's not for you. Like if it's stressful to you and it causes you more stress, then this is not your best tool.
Right.
For me, this works.
Absolutely. So does Trish Baxter spend almost all her time doing marketing? I mean, when I see all the stuff she posts, is it almost like 100%?
Yeah, she's like 100%. And her and I are very similar in our like approaches to like, we're more in the digital, like LinkedIn type space. I probably have a little bit larger funnel just because of the podcast and the way I do it. But yeah, she's fully stepped away. Like if she gets a client lead in, she has people she passes things off to that she might do some like upper level management of it, but actual like file work, she doesn't. Like she has a whole system. Like she sets up a whole thing for like her whole 60 days to clarity. Like she has a system for it. And so she's involved, but she's not going to a depth. Like that's not happening. Like not anymore. and I'm striving to reach that point.
Well, I have arrived there, and it's a pretty nice place to be. I welcome you to that arrival.
Yes, I have probably a ways to go, but it is the end goal is to be like, hey, like I don't need to handle cases. I have people to do it, and I can just develop relationships and maintain relationships.
Well, and I tell people all the time, you can be the best lawyer in the world, but if you don't have any clients, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it truly doesn't matter. So, and I think there's a tendency to get a little too tied to just the numbers in terms of generation when there are so many more things that go on. But anyway, it's we all do the best we can.
Yes. Yeah. But so I'm super excited for our chat today. I have some notes, but I have like a good idea in my head. How like I like how you broke out your 3 parts, and I kind of had that in my mind as well. So yeah, I mean,
I'm willing to go wherever you want. I will only disclose personal things about me.
Sure.
And the only thing, like I said, that I don't know how familiar you are with AA, but one of the AA traditions is we don't identify ourselves. In the old days when they wrote it at the level of radio, press, and TV is what it said. So if I'm doing a private talk to a group that's not recorded or anything, I'll talk about AA, not to sell it, but just let people know, because I want people to know. I mean, like if somebody hears this and wants to talk to me about alcoholism or recovery or whatever, I'll talk to them one-on-one. I mean, if they want to call me, I will talk to them. And I'll talk about AA. I just don't use AA, even though people could guess it from the kinds of things I say. I just don't use that term or identify that when I talk publicly.
Yeah. That's fine. Like I have, so you could, I mean, I never have set questions. I have,
that's
like,
okay. You go wherever you want. I'm fine.
But you could just, if it's, I'm not going to ask about AA, but if I have certain like areas that would be like, oh, like how did your recovery go? Like, things like that you can finagle how you the best way to respond.
I can finesse those. I will have no trouble with that.
Okay. So I'm still going to start in my normal way that we just generally get into who you are, but we'll keep it shorter just because you've already been on and we don't need to like run through that. But in case someone missed our last podcast, I don't want them to be like, who the hell is this Sam guy? Like, and why is he talking?
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I have it pretty much set up like, how you got where you were, what changes you are now, and then advice for the future is how
I'll go at it however you want. And if I get off track, don't hesitate to interrupt me and bring me back.
Oh yeah, I don't mind off track. We get off track all the time. It's the story of
don't we all? Anybody who's a mother of young children gets off track all the time.
Oh, I know. Yeah,
you got no choice.
It's like a daily struggle. All right, so if you're good, let's start. And like usual, I'll do my true intro after you hop off. Will be about an hour. And this is probably will come out. I think the second or third week of August is probably where this will be.
Okay.
All right. Ready?
Ready.
All right. Good morning, Sam. Welcome to the Defense of Arrest again. How are you?
I'm great. I'm glad to be invited. Not everybody invites me back twice, so I'm glad to be back.
Well,
Sometimes they're sorry for the first time.
well, I'm excited to have you back because we had such a great chat. Your first time you were on, that we were talking about mediations and, how to like approach a successful mediation. And we're veering off course here today because you and I had a great off-camera conversation last time about, your recovery from addiction to alcohol and, how you got through that. And you and I just chatted about how that would just be a really good thing to talk about on this podcast because so many lawyers and so many just people struggle with alcohol addiction. And you just spoke so candidly about it and were just so wonderful to talk to that I thought it'd be great to have you on to talk about it. So more like live and recorded on camera.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
So I'm so happy that, you're willing to come on because a lot of people wouldn't be so open to talk about it. So I appreciate that.
Well, that happened kind of accident. After 4,000 mediations and 27 years sober, you get to a little bit different place. But what actually happened the first time I talked about this publicly at all, other than in recovery groups, I got a call from the woman who's the head of the lawyers and judges assistance program in our state. And so she runs all kinds of things for lawyers and judges with all kinds of mental health issues. And she said, I'm going to be talking with this group, Sam, but I'd like somebody to give their story. Would you be willing to talk after I talk about what we do? And there was a long pause by me because I'm talking to my peers. Mm-hmm. And then after that pause, she said, well, Sam, we couldn't ask a young person to do it. So literally in that, it was a seminar to a large group of defense lawyers. And that whoever was chairing the seminar had already asked me to come speak about mediation. And then this person called, so we speak about addiction. I literally at 10 o'clock, I spent an hour talking about being an alcoholic. And at 11 o'clock, I talked about being a mediator to people I've mediated with hundreds of times. So it was humbling, if nothing else.
Now, and I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself, but, since you were talking to a group of your peers and you may have known some of did they know your backstory when you talked about it at that time?
Most of them did not. And I don't keep it a secret, but I also don't wear it on a t-shirt because my feeling generally is if people don't know that other people have suffered from whatever kind of a mental health issue that we all kind of tend to want to hide societally and personally, then they don't even know who to go talk to privately about it. So, my particular issue was alcoholism, but there are many others. And so what I found when I talked more broadly about it, I got way more comments back from people from talking about being an alcoholic than I did talking about being a mediator. I'll tell you that. I got a lot of feedback. And truly none of it was negative. And I mean, people reach, because almost, at least in my experience, almost everybody has been touched by some kind of an addiction issue these days. Whether it doesn't have to be meth. It could be prescription drugs. It could be alcohol. It could maybe pick one. And so whether it's their brother, their sister, their spouse, their child, whatever. I mean, literally this week I've talked to 3 different people, just happenstance, not seeking them out, who have an adult child who's suffering from addiction. And those just kind of gut-wrenching decisions as parents, how much do we intervene and how much do we let this play out because this is theirs to deal with or not, and I can't fix them. And that's so hard as a parent because you'd be willing to do everything you could. So long answer to your question.
And touching on that though, it's also, I think, gone are the days that there's that misconception like, oh, that couldn't happen to us. Like it doesn't have any socioeconomic, parameters. Like it really can be anyone. It could be any profession. Like it could be anything. And I think that's why people are much more able to listen and talk about it because I think it's not like, oh, just that's not us. That wouldn't happen to us.
I think you're right, particularly later in the process. But what I say, and this is what was said to me early on, and it made so much sense, is that alcoholism is first and foremost a disease of self-deception. And because of that, we all have our coping skills, whether we're in a partnership or married relationship or something else, and we start there. We think, oh, he just drank too much that night. And then even when he or she realizes it, then we might, as I did, start hiding it, because I knew I was drinking too much and I didn't want people to find out. So it tends to take a certain level of pain, because we all, I mean, denial is not necessarily, it can be a legitimate coping mechanism. I mean, denial is not necessarily wrong. Sometimes it helps us get through life. It's just not a good long-term strategy if there is a significant chronic problem.
Yeah.
And whether it's diabetes or whether it's alcoholism. And so I think as a society, we tend to accept it, but we'd still rather it be those other people over there. Because if someone truly has an addiction problem, recovery is at least as inconvenient and painful for many people and many families as the addiction itself was, because it becomes, as someone continues in their addiction, it truly becomes a family disease. I mean, spouses are affected, parents are affected, business partners are affected. It's not just isolated. And what often happens, I will speak for my own family, is everybody kind of starts dancing around the tornado. Because the conversations are uncomfortable and we'd rather have peace, and it is just, and each family or each person kind of has their own unique stamp on what their disease is like, and at the same time you don't want to make it so unique that you're unwilling to listen to other people to get help.
Yeah. So, and let's just take a step back though to your own personal story and journey. How, I mean, I've heard lots of stories be like, oh, I started drinking when I was, in junior high school, and or whatever maybe, but when did your journey start, and when did you start to have that voice in the back of your head that this isn't serving you, this might be an issue?
I always drank. I mean, but I would drink socially, or I might drink too much at a party, or I might binge drink, but I wasn't drinking daily. And not everybody has a specific starting point where they say they just kind of gave up. So I knew I was drinking too much. I would drink some secretly, but not every day secretly. And then in September, one of the things that I was afraid of was, I was always afraid of flying. Flying was terrifying for me. And what I found was 5 airplane bottles completely got rid of that terror. So I would be honest about fear of flying, and how 5 airplane bottles took care of that terror, as if that was a legitimate way to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I was going on a trip, at a piece of tort litigation, involved a whole bunch of lawyers, and we were going out to San Francisco to take depositions. And since we were starting on Monday, I didn't want to be hungover, so we went on Saturday, and I just drank and drank and drank. And I was just probably had alcohol poisoning on Sunday, but to get better, I drank on Sunday as well. And then we got up the next morning. I did not drink that morning, but I'd rented the car that we're going in. I ran a red light in the middle of downtown San Francisco, totaled the car on the way to these depositions, broke one lawyer's ankle in the car.
Oh, wow.
And then we kind of went on to our depositions and took the depositions. My guess is I probably was above the legal limit then. I don't know. Just because of how much I drank the day before. But what I remember is most people would say, maybe you ought to not drink. That's a pretty good idea for you not to drink, or don't fly, if that's really why you got to drink like that. But I remember coming home and decided, I'm done trying not to drink. I'm going to drink, because whatever it was about the vagaries of life, and at that time, my wife and I had 2 young daughters who were 2 and 4. I'm working as a litigator, so I'm working a lot of hours. We were yet to have another child 2 years after that, another daughter. And I just decided, living life on life's terms, I would not have put it this way, but living life on life's terms was just too hard for me. Other people that might exercise or talk to a friend or see a therapist, or, just whatever they might do to deal with the stress of trying lots of cases. For me, alcohol worked. And that's what I started using. And what I found is, it worked for me at work and it worked for me at home. So I would drive home, and I knew if my wife saw that I was drinking as much as I was, that she'd say something to me. So I'd stop and I'd get 2 or 3 airplane bottles and drink them on the way home. And then we'd have a couple of beers at home. And then I decided, well, airplane bottles, that doesn't make economic sense. Maybe I'll get a half pint. I'll split it up. And then maybe I'll get a pint. And finally, I was up to getting a half gallon of vodka, handle vodka, that fit into my briefcase.
Oh, wow.
And so I just, the level kept going up and up and up, and I'd pass out about 8 o'clock, and my wife would just think, well, he's worked hard. He's really tired. And I move on the next day feeling like I had a hangover and kind of moved on down my merry road. But anyway, that was kind of the beginning for me. And what I did was I surrendered to alcohol. I was at that point, I wouldn't have identified it this way, but I was pretty much willing to go wherever it took me because it was the only relief I got. When I grabbed that bottle and I felt the warmth of the straight vodka going down my throat and into my belly, I knew within about 30 to 60 seconds how I was going to feel. And I knew that part of it would last about 5 minutes. The problem was I just kept chasing it, and I would chase it till I passed out. At that point, there was no telling what I do. I would do whatever alcohol made seem reasonable to me. I don't mean that I wasn't responsible for my actions, but I had certainly anesthetized what other people might think are more reasonable ways to respond to the world.
And did you find, at that time, was there a shift that you were, the lines of when was it acceptable to drink and not acceptable to drink were blurred, and you were crossing those lines?
Yes, and I would have, even after I stopped drinking, I would have told you that I didn't drink at work. Well, then it turned out I just left work early a lot of days. And then when I thought about it, I remember specifically I was involved in a case in November and December of 1994, and it was when people still read newspapers. So it was a case that was on the front page of the newspaper, and I was headed over to court, and my hands were shaking so badly I thought I can't do this hearing. And I opened the trunk of my car and I got into my briefcase and I looked around to see if anybody was looking. And I took 4 or 5 big slugs off that handle of vodka, closed my trunk, and went and did the hearing. And that calmed me down. So I didn't. Again, I'm not claiming that was what I thought was rational at the time. I would not defend it. But I remember looking up at my office building and think, what in the hell are you doing? What have you come to? And yet that's what I did. I went and did the hearing and continued drinking for a little. I didn't drink a long time after that. That was near the beginning of the end for me.
Yeah. So, and so was there's something toward the end that pushed you to be I need to change this. This is not I can't do this anymore.
I was by the very end, I was drinking about a quart of vodka a day. I would wake up in the morning feeling like I had the flu, just kind of laying down on the cold tile of the bathroom floor to try to feel better. And I knew the only thing that would make me feel better was a drink. And yet I still drank. I remember trying a case up in northern Indiana and waking up the morning before closing arguments, and there were bottles on the bed and the TV was blaring. And I thought, holy cow, I got to go give a closing argument. And I took a couple of drinks and I went and gave the closing argument. What happened though, some of those things turned out okay. That trial turned out okay, not because I did a brilliant case of lawyering. The facts were good for us. Mm-hmm. We won the case because the facts were good for us, and I didn't totally screw it up. But part of me believed I can't do this without alcohol. I can't go meet clients. I can't try cases. I can't take depositions. But by the time I got to the very end, and that would be January of 1995, so that's after that hearing, I just hated myself so much. Yeah. And because I hated myself, I hated my wife. Mm-hmm. I hated my kids. I thought I was a victim of everything. I would have told you, if you had my life, you'd have to drink like this too. Now, mind you, I'm a partner in a law firm, so I'm making more than enough money to pay my bills. I've been married for 12 or 13 years at that point. We have 3 daughters that are seemingly healthy, and we're functioning in the community, or apparently functioning in the community. And yet my perception of that was, if you had my life, you'd be drunk too. I had no, but I knew I hated myself, and I felt so horrible. And I had a client at the time. In fact, my biggest client at the time had been very honest about his alcoholism and recovered from alcoholism. And I was sitting in his office one day with my briefcase that was full of vodka, talking to him about a case. And he said something, and I was sitting in his office and I started sobbing in my biggest client's office. Yeah. And he is a really kind person. And he just kind of shook his head. And I told him, I said, I can't stop drinking. And he said, you could have blown me over with a feather. I never would have any idea. And I opened my briefcase and showed him that it was just full of vodka. He said, well, I know some people that help me not drink. And so if you're interested, he said, I'm not trying to twist your arm. You'd be welcome to come join us.
Yeah.
And I did. And I showed up there with him and some other people, and I still had my briefcase full of vodka. And after we talked, they said, how about if we walk out to the car with you? I said, fine. I said, do you mind if we look in your briefcase? I said, no. And they took every bottle out of my briefcase.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the beginning for me. So I went a few days and didn't drink. And then I had a trip planned to I needed to be in Phoenix. Need be the operative word. And these people said, you're in no shape to do that. You're going to drink again. And if you keep drinking like this, you're going to die. This is a deadly disease. And I didn't believe that. I was in plenty of denial. So I thought, no, I can do this. You guys don't understand. I'm different, which tends to be a pretty common refrain for people that have addiction problems. So I flew to Phoenix. I white knuckled it through this trip to Phoenix. And when I got to the Sky Harbor airport before I left, I went in, I bought a quart of vodka. I went into one of the stalls in the bathroom. I drank the whole thing down and I got on the airplane.
Oh, wow.
And that was my last drink.
Yeah.
Fortunately, when I got home, I did not drive myself home, although I'd be lying to you to tell you that I didn't drive drunk. I did it lots of times.
Yeah.
And I got home, I thought, I just don't want to keep doing this. And so after that, it became kind of a full-time job, just trying not to drink a day at a time. But it was just, I mean, a term you'll often hear people use is incomprehensible demoralization.
Mm-hmm.
And that incomprehensible demoralization can come when you've got a job and a spouse and 3 kids at home, or for some people it comes when they've lost everything. And for some people it never comes. I mean, often people will say, if you're suffering from addiction, you kind of have 3 options. 1 is to get better, 2 is an institution, and 3 is death. Those tend to be and I realize there's lots of nuance to that. But those tend to be the places where things go. And I was talking to a pathologist one time, and he said, there are so many unreported addiction-related deaths because people fall down the stairs. They fall in their kitchen and hit their head, and it shows up as a brain injury. Yeah, some kind of trauma. And so what happened is that as I looked back, and when I'm talking to my client and finally being honest with him, and I was lying to my wife about all this.
Yeah.
So it's not like anybody's going to put we've been married 39 years now, but nobody at that point would put our marriage up as a poster for this is really what you want. But when I looked back on it, I mean, I would get up on Saturday morning. My wife has her master's in counseling. Was a juvenile probation officer. But once we started having kids, she decided she wanted to stay home with kids. And so on Saturdays, I'd say, well, I'll give you a break on Saturdays. I get up Saturday morning and we'd take the girls out and we'd go get, to McDonald's, and we'd come to the office and play in the library. And when we had libraries and law offices, and do those things. Well, when I would do that, claiming I'm giving her a break, I would sometimes drink a pint of vodka before I did that. I mean, I would, and it took me probably years into recovery to be honest about that. What a danger I was to my own 3 little girls. I mean, I would have told you, I may drink too much and I may not be the best husband in the world, but by golly, am I a good father? Total lie. I was lying to myself and everybody else. If I'm lying to myself, how can I tell the truth to anybody else? But those things were so difficult. Just that honesty, so difficult to come to grips with. The same pathologist that I mentioned one time, I was about 3 or 4 years sober, and he puts his arm around me and he said, Sam, I might kind of like you if you had any capacity to be honest. And I remember my feelings were hurt. But when I think about that, and this was kind of the dovetail between, and we didn't talk about it last time because it was really more about mediation, but I did my first mediation and got sober within a few months of each other. So I started mediating and stopped drinking at the same time. And what happened was, as I learned more things about myself and my alcoholism and entitlement and anger and fear and all those things that drive many of us, some lawyers, not all lawyers perhaps, those things that I needed to learn about that drove me to drink were also things that people experience that aren't alcoholics. So when people would show up in a mediation and they'd have a real sense of what justice was and what fairness was, and that the world wasn't fair, and they were angry and they were afraid and they were entitled and they felt vulnerable. Those things all started to make sense to me. They weren't just third party me thinking about it, because the character flaws or character defects or character challenges, whatever word someone wants to use, that alcoholics have are no different than those that everybody has. Right? We've all got stress. We may have an anger management problem. Pick whatever your issue is. It's just that people with addiction have a specific dysfunctional way of responding to it, which is alcohol and drugs. And once I learned that, I could actually connect better with people without, I don't go into every mediation, start talking about being a drunk. But when those people would respond with anger, I'd think, oh, they're afraid of something. How can I engage with them in a way that's effective? Because that's what people did with me in my recovery. They would say they didn't just come at me and argue with me all the time. I mean, they would sometimes, or sometimes they just told me to shut up. But I don't tell people in mediations to shut up. I don't find that an effect. It's an option. It's just not a good one. But I learned as people dealt with me what was effective, and they kind of talked. I might be afraid, but they wouldn't necessarily call me out on the fear right away, because that may be too vulnerable. I wouldn't have acknowledged being afraid. I talk about being concerned, or I talk about being stressed or having anxiety or whatever else. And then we could get to some of the more fundamental issues and that address the alcoholism itself. But those things have been going on for me for a long time. I mean, so I was 37 when I got sober, and I'm 64 now, so 27 years. But it took a long time. It took a long time. And then I remember being so concerned, because we live in a relatively small community. And when I finally was honest with my wife, this is what I'm doing with my drinking, and I need to get better. And we talked about, a way to get better and the help I needed. And I thought, well, hopefully she doesn't tell anybody, because how am I going to have a client base if she did that? Well, she was so angry and she needed to deal with it herself. She told everybody at Kroger. She was telling the cashier and the guy that was filling, putting cucumbers in the produce. And I remember going to somebody, one of the people was helping me, and said, my wife's doing these things. She's telling other people all this stuff. Said, your wife gets to do whatever she damn well pleases. She's not the alcoholic. Said, you live with it. And it's your job to get better. And she may or may not choose to stay with you. That's going to be a choice she makes. But whatever she needs to do to take care of herself is hers, and stay the hell out of her way. And so I also don't talk to people like that in mediation. So I needed some people to be honest with me in a direct and pretty powerful way. And sometimes with language that we might not broadly share, even on a podcast.
Now, I did want to ask though about when you came clean to your wife. I mean, you were being very secretive about your drinking. Was she just completely floored? Did she have no clue, or had she suspected but kind of didn't say anything?
No, when she looked back on it, she certainly knew that I drank too much sometimes. I mean, like, we'd be at a party or a dinner, and she'd be kicking me under the table because I said the same thing 8 times, or she'd say, we need to go. But she thought of it being in those circumstances. I wasn't a yelling, screaming, throw things against the wall drunk. That didn't make me any better drunk. Just I was a different drunk than that.
Yeah.
No, so she felt she didn't trust me at all. She felt like she'd really been violated and lied to, and she was right. She had been. And so, I mean, she wondered whether she could ever trust me again, whether she wanted to continue this marriage or not. And a lot of that she worked out on her own, and some of it she shared with me, and some of it she didn't. But yeah, it was probably the first 18 months after I got sober, may have been the worst time in our 39 years of marriage. I mean, worse than the drunk part, because we kind of adjusted to me being drunk. I mean, she had her role, I had my role. I didn't want to get found out, so I didn't interfere with her role. I wasn't telling her how to be a mother, and she ran our household. She paid the bills. She did all the heavy lifting to keep our household going. And ironic, then I stopped drinking, and I wanted to give her a lot of instructions. Like I suddenly became the expert. She did not want to give me a warm hug with that.
No, she was not happy with that.
She was not remotely happy with that. And I mean, literally, I would come home, and some days, we got, at the time I got sober, our children are 5, 4, and 3. So they were really pretty close together. And she would scream at me. She hated me. And if you met my wife, I mean, she's a really mild, she's very even. I mean, that's not, she doesn't present that way, and she doesn't behave that way privately, except I had behaved in ways that pushed her beyond what her own limit was.
Yeah. And
I forget whether I told you this last time, but we went to a therapist, because by golly, we needed one. And we've talked about the trust piece, and the therapist said, Sam, I want you to go home every night. And every night when you walk in the door, no matter what Patty's doing, no matter what she says, I want you to say, I'm home, I'm sober, and I'm glad to be here. Mm-hmm. And being a lawyer and full of myself, I wanted to argue about that. I said, what if I'm not really happy to be there? And he looked me in the eye and he said, when did being honest become so important to you? Just fucking say it. Now, not every, sorry about my language, but not every therapist would choose to talk to somebody like that. But I did it. I mean, every night I came home, no matter what was going on, that's the way I walked in the door, because I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to lose my marriage, and I wanted to get better. And my wife was talking to a friend years later and told her that was so incredibly important to her.
Yeah.
And so over time, she came to trust me again, and we came to live our lives again. And our 3 daughters are now, 29 and 31 and 33 or something like that. I think I got their years all off by one, but they're grown and they got their own kids. But it was hard. I mean, and what I forget, I think we forget this a lot, but an alcoholic in a home really is, I use the term kind of a tornado that people dance around. And then when people realize that they're getting better, everybody's slapping them on the back. If I go give a talk, somebody's going to clap for that talk. They forget the person that was living with the tornado, that was suffering alongside and didn't necessarily know why, that held things together. They're not getting clapped on the back. People aren't saying, boy, aren't you great? It's like, what am I, chopped liver over here on the side? And I think that gets lost, and it certainly did in our family sometimes, that, people say, isn't it great going to Patty and saying, isn't it great that Sam's sober? I said, well, some days, I mean, it's just, he's a pain in the ass. And so I think it's really important not to forget that if it is a family disease, then it's also a family recovery process. And just as my friends told me, Patty gets to do what she wants. You need to do whatever you need to do not to drink. And you guys are going to decide whether you're going to end up having a new marriage, basically. I mean, if you're in a long marriage, you're in lots of marriages anyway. I heard somebody say, and I think that's really true. But if you throw addiction into that, it's like deciding again whether you want to stay with this, because it cannot be the same marriage it was before.
Yeah.
Not and continue.
Now, and one thing that kind of I thought of when you mentioned, when after you got sober, and you were kind of even more of a pain in the ass, did you feel like, or maybe for your wife, beforehand, you're even though she didn't know you were drinking, your behaviors were predictable.
Yes.
Because you were predictable. You knew every day what you were going to do, and you were probably going to pass out by 8 p.m. And so that she was used to it. Yeah. And then you made a change, which you needed to make, but then suddenly you're not predictable anymore, or you're predictably angry. And that's probably harder to deal with as a new venture, I should say.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I want to be careful not to speak too much for Patty, but for me, in terms of our routines, I left really, I frequently left home in the dark, and I frequently got home in the dark. And I spent a long time and I'd done that for years. I mean, even before I started drinking as much as I was drinking. So that was the routine we knew. And I got home and I was not awake a long time. So I'd go to sleep, and then I'd get up early again the next morning and go back at it. So it was so she had 100% control during the day. I'd come home and I'd interfere maybe a little bit just by the presence of another body in the household. But I'd leave, certainly before the children were up, before our girls were up, and often before she was up. And then I'd often work weekends too. So weekends were a little different. I went to church drunk. I remember standing in the pew and kind of, listing one way and the other while people are singing. I'm trying to hold on to the back. So, and yet because that was the myth I was telling myself when I talk about that self-deception. Yeah. I said, I'm a good upstanding citizen. I'm a good husband. I would say those things because I needed to, because otherwise, how could I live with that churning conflict going on in the middle of my belly all the time? The difference between who I claimed to be and who I actually was.
Yeah. So, during your first steps of, in your recovery, how did you make it through the battle of every day and, push away like the demons that are in your head saying, you need it, you need it, you need it, or whatever it may be? Like, what was your method?
Well, I had a group of people that were helping me, and I certainly didn't do it on my own, not remotely. And they were willing to be deeply engaged. I had lots of phone numbers, and I would call people, and they would call me, and they said, "You can call me any time of the night I'll come meet you at 2 a.m. if you want to have a cup of coffee, not to drink." But early on, and it's funny, I was so compelled to drink. By the end, I couldn't not drink. I drank. It wasn't even that I wanted to. I couldn't not drink.
Yeah.
And it was almost miraculous when I made it through a day not drinking. And so it was a little bit like you described. I mean, I white knuckled it. When I go to work in the morning, it was white knuckling it to get by the liquor stores. And when I drive all over the state to do cases, I knew where all the little liquor stores were all over the state because I'd stopped at many of them. So it was really staying in touch with other people, and remembering how awful it was. I mean, so what I'd done is when I stopped drinking, I'd completely taken away the anesthetic that I'd used to be married, to be a father, to be a lawyer, to be a person in the community. And so the alcohol was gone, and we might say that's good, but I had to the pain was not gone. The pain was overwhelming. In many ways, it was like a 50-51 decision every day. 51% do I don't not want to drink, and 49 I do. And but a lot of that was really having people that help with what I would call kind of a program of recovery. Now, I don't talk specifically about my program of recovery, although if anybody's listening to this, I'd be happy to talk to people one-on-one about the specifics. And the reason is this: we all know, whether we're seeing in our news feed or something else, celebrities or people in our community, or maybe politicians or whomever, that drank and touted their recovery, and then they went out and drank again. And again and again. And I want to be careful not to hold myself out as a spokesperson for some program of recovery. I mean, if you Google alcoholism or addiction or recovery, I mean, you'll have a million things come up on your phone or your computer. And so there are people that from Passages Malibu to Rational Recovery to inpatient programs at local hospitals to Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, pick one. There are lots out there. So I'm not here to criticize any of them or to advocate for any of them. I only know what worked for me, and that's the only experience I have. Sure. But kind of getting back to your question, it was lots of people and lots of intervention. I mean, I probably talked to other people that were recovering alcoholics often 6, 8, 10 times a day in the beginning. And I'd see them for coffee. I'd see them for lunch. I'd see them just to kind of get together and spend time together. And sometime it was January 29th of 1995 was the last time I had a drink. Sometime between then and in the spring or early summer, a day happened and I remembered I didn't want to drink. You'd think I would mark that one just as prominently as the day of my last drink, but I don't remember when it was. I thought, wow. I mean, that truly, imagining when I was drunk, imagining that day when I wouldn't want to drink was every bit as difficult or impossible for me as trying to imagine a new color. I could not imagine that. It was beyond, or losing weight. I mean, when I, if I'm 20 pounds overweight, I know these programs to lose weight work, but I still don't believe it can really happen, and then when it does, I might gain the weight back, but I think I really just couldn't believe it. And then a few more, and that didn't mean that was the last time I wanted to drink. And I remember going that spring, earlier in the spring, when I wasn't done wanting to drink yet. My best friend growing up, his mom died, and I went up to her funeral, and visited funerals in the community I grew up on are big occasions for people to drink. I mean, we mourn the dead, and we celebrate the living, usually with boatloads of alcohol. I remember going up there, and I went to the funeral, and I went back to their house afterwards. And there was lots of alcohol, and I didn't drink, and I drove home, and I made it home past the liquor stores I used to stop at. And I came home, and I told one of the people who was helping me, and he said, I almost wish you would have drunk, because now you'll think you can do it on your own. Did you call anybody? Did you talk to anybody? Yeah. Did you develop any kind of a plan to go into a situation where you would naturally drink? So what you could do not to drink, to call somebody. And I did none of those. So that's what there is an element of, whether we call it luck, grace, whatever term one wants to use. I can't tell you why some of the same people I stopped drinking with are dead from addiction today after 27 years. Some of them stayed sober a year, some of them 10 years. And then they drank themselves to death, or they died with a needle in their arm. I do not have any ability to tell you why them and not me. Yeah. So that part of it I want to be grateful for. And even though I can't explain it, whatever I have done has worked for me, but not on my own. Even though I don't call people 9 and 10 times a day. I'm not having to get together with people 3 and 4 times a day now, but I still talk to another alcoholic every day. Yeah. I still get together to meet with people every week, because it saved my life. And I don't mean that casually. I mean, I sincerely believe that I would be dead by now if I hadn't gotten a lot of incredibly generous, no questions asked help from other people. And the thing that has been so, I guess, nourishing for me is they don't all look like me. They don't all have the same job I have. Some of them didn't graduate from high school, and they'll have more wisdom than I have on a certain thing. And it's not just men or just women, or, I mean, it's, and that's when I think about what I do, when we think about how our lives get kind of cordoned off, either economically or professionally or by the schools our kids go to or those other things. Most of the time I'm running into other people that from the outside looking in seem to be living a life that's familiar to me. Yeah. And by getting together with people that are recovering alcoholics, there's no password at the door. And so anybody can come no matter what their problem is, whether they've been at jail, whether they've got tattoos all over their face, whether they've lost their family, whatever it is. And that has been such an eye-opening experience. And I think part of that has also made me enjoy mediations more, because people that come into mediation, I mean, for the clients, it's often a one-off, unless they're constant business people that are litigating all the time. People don't want to need a lawyer. They don't want to give up that kind of control. They don't want to be that vulnerable. And to be able to sit with them and I'm not claiming, I mean, a lot of people might say I'm pretty angry when I mediate even. And so I'm a pretty direct communicator when I mediate, but I can be kind and acknowledge those other people and not have to control everything, and acknowledge that they have every right to make any decision they want, just like an alcoholic or an addict does. I can go drink today if I want to. Those people cannot keep me from drinking. If I want to drink, I can drink today. Yeah. They helped me decide that's not the better option.
Yeah. So do you, this might be an odd question, but like, knowing what you know and what you personally have gone through, and, you know, talking to other recovering alcoholics, do you have like, sometimes when you see people, you can kind of spot things about them, like something might be going on there that, you know, you can spot because you've lived through it, and that might fall under the blind eye of, you know, someone else?
I think so. And I think a lot of people that are recovering would say that just little inconsistencies, or somebody's drinking a little funny, or they'll leave at funny times and stay away from the room and come back and they seem just a little bit different. Or when everybody else has stopped, they continue to drinking, or you see subtle behavioral changes, just a little slack in the face, or maybe a little bit of impatience, or a bigger personality that controls the table when they didn't, or somebody's angrier with their children. And I don't mean that everybody can't notice those. Yeah. So yes, and at the same time, I want to be really careful not to think that that I am omniscient. Yeah. That I know that right. Person's an alcoholic. I mean, one of the funny things for me, and this is not blanketly true, but I started noticing it more often, is, you know, when you're drinking that much alcohol, you're getting boatloads of sugar. So what I started noticing is that lots of people that are still actively, not necessarily alcoholics, but that drink a lot of them don't want dessert. Huh. Now that's not true of everybody. I've got plenty, but I noticed it's not uncommon, and that's for people that go out to dinner when somebody doesn't want dessert. Don't assume they're an alcoholic. But
I never get dessert.
Exactly. Well, and for all kinds of reasons, people don't. But
I was like, oh God, what are you saying, Sam?
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. But it was true for me. I mean, I never got dessert. And once I wasn't getting all that sugar from alcohol, I wanted dessert all the time. I wanted to eat Snickers all day long. And that's not, like I said, that's not a telltale sign of alcohol for an alcoholic, but it was true for me. I got all that sugar. I needed to get the sugar. I wanted the sugar at some level. But yeah, I do notice those signs sometimes. But two things. One is, I don't want to say anything to anybody unless somebody asks me.
That's my other question.
Yeah. So I do not call people out or say, you know, do you think you have a drinking problem? Now, if it were, you know, my brother, my best friend, something like that, I might say something to them. But even then, it would probably be a question. It would be more, I noticed this. Are you okay? Not, it seems like you're drinking too much. I think you're an alcoholic. It would be more, I'm a little concerned, but I would be very careful about people I say that to, because most people, if they aren't ready to stop drinking or address an addiction problem, if I'm even right that they have one, they're going to get it in their own good time. I mean, me saying something to them is not likely to do it, and likely to end a friendship, hurt a marriage, whatever. So I just kind of tuck it away and sometimes just try to have some compassion, say, boy, or just have some gratitude. that was me. I mean, sometimes I'll see people out and it will just make me cringe because I'll know, golly, that was me. And I don't want to forget that. I don't want to continue to punish myself for it, but I also don't want to forget it, because it is a helpful reminder that no matter, I mean, one way some people will describe it is, I want to look through that drink and see what's behind it, which is the whole bottle, which is the behavior, which is passing out, which is putting my wife and children in danger and other people in danger again. I mean, I've got a friend, he says, if I go back out and drink, call my law partners and tell them that I'm no longer part of the firm. Call my wife and tell her she no longer has a husband. Call my kids and tell them they don't have a father. And that just, I mean, that can bring tears to my eyes. I believe that to be true. And I do not, that's not a price I'm any longer willing to pay for drinking.
And so, now that you are, I don't want to say so far removed from it, but you've been living, in recovery for almost 30 years, but, you had mentioned that flying on airplanes, that was a trigger. And then you and I, before the podcast, we were talking how you were traveling a lot this week. Do you still experience those same types of triggers? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Not nearly, like, for instance, flying doesn't bother me at all anymore. I mean, not even a little bit. I'm not nervous before. I'm not nervous. The turbulence comes, like, well, this is the low roller coaster ride. So but that was slow in coming. I mean, literally what a person who was helping me a lot said, you need to decide whether you need not to drink or you need to fly. But that's said, because there are other people that can do that work. You can transition your work, because if you keep drinking, you're going to be dead. So you think you're so important, or this case is so important, or you're the only one that can do this, so you've got to get on an airplane. No, you don't. You may choose to get on that airplane, but you need to understand that is a choice. It is not a have to. And if you get on that airplane, you can choose to be nervous and grip, hold the stranger's hand next to you if you have to. Now these days you might get sued for that, but you need to be careful whose hand you hold. But so to make that decision, and I flew in terror for probably 4 or 5 years. And then I was flying so much that I just kind of got desensitized to it. But the other, I didn't have any other identifiable, to use your word, trigger other than flying. I mean, another friend of mine who's an engineer says people will describe what they did to drink or their behavior even after drinking that no one would justify. He would say, let's just call that alcoholism. I don't know. I mean, for me, the trigger was I woke up in the morning. I mean, it really was. I mean, I woke up in the morning and what I do is drink. And because I feel better when I drink. And since I don't like discomfort, even the tiniest bit of discomfort, then I'm going to drink. Now, for other people, like my friend's funeral would have been, I mean, we'd probably call that a trigger. That we started hanging out with different people. I mean, I've got one friend now who we'd been friends with for 15 years probably at the time. And we just kind of moved away from that friendship. Not because there's anything wrong with them. We didn't say anything to them, but they felt really abandoned. Well, ironically, now he's a recovering alcoholic, so we see him a lot again. But I mean, their feelings were really hurt, and that doesn't mean that. And it wasn't because we didn't move away from that because we thought or were telling they were alcoholics. It was just what we did when we got together with them was so centered on alcohol that I was incapable of doing that. And so I either stay away from those things, or unlike that funeral, that was a really good when the guy said to me, I wish you'd drunk, as opposed to thinking you can do it on your own. If I'm knowingly going into a situation like that, I talk to somebody else who's in recovery. I say, this is what I'm going into. It's not that I never go into a bar if there's a reason to go into a bar. I don't go into a bar to sit at a bar by myself and have a Coke. So, because I don't need to be in bars. I can watch a ball game any place. I can see friends other places. But there may be a client that wants to meet at their local pub because that's what they do. And I can do that. I wouldn't have done it early on. So I create a plan. And often what I'll do, if there's that kind of a situation, that plan will include, I'm going to call one of my friends in recovery before I go in, and I'm going to call a friend in recovery afterwards. Now, early on, I don't find that remotely humiliating now. But early on, I would have thought, a man of my caliber shouldn't have to do that. You don't understand how important I am. Now, I'm so important that I'm starting my day by drinking pints of vodka while I drive with my kids, and yet I wanted to trust my own thinking. I mean, that's why I say, I feel like I need to have tattooed on my forehead or on my whiteboard in my office, a disease of self-deception. But what I've also learned is that other human beings live in self-deception, right? I mean, it's whether it's they recognize things or they don't, or people that come to see us as lawyers, and we hear what they say, what were you thinking? What were you thinking when you made that decision? That was self-deception, not necessarily alcohol induced, but self-deception is out there for all of us. Among the most difficult things I think for people to do is to ask for help. And that's really what people are doing all the time when they come to see us as lawyers. I mean, they've run into a situation that they can't handle themselves. They've got some notion of what they think is fair or not fair. There is some obstruction to that, a person or something going on, and they hire a lawyer to go change it if they can. And think about when those people come in to see us, they don't think there are two ways to look at it or 10. It's like, I am right. This shouldn't happen this way. I shouldn't have to pay you nearly as much money. It ought to be over quickly, and you ought to be able to give me a guarantee. Right now, that's the way an alcoholic thinks. But what I found is that's the way people think. And so our job is to engage them in a way that we don't tell them they're the idiots, because they're not. They're no different than we are. But we want to engage them in a skillful way that allows them to have those conversations where we can talk with them directly about what the options are, what we can or can't do, and what the risks are, so they can make good decisions based on their priorities.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of what happens, I find, for most people in recovery. But early on, and I'll speak only for me, I was incapable of thinking well. That fog of this is the way I do things on autopilot, and alcohol is the fuel that drives me. It just had to get bad enough. People talk about bottoms, whatever one's bottom is, that incomprehensible demoralization, that I was willing to listen to what other people told me and do it, even if it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Because what made sense to me kept me drunk. And the idea, think about that. If you're just a normal human being, and you've got a problem, and you go talk to your best friend, and they tell you something that doesn't make sense. I mean, you want them to explain it to you, and you want it to make sense to you, and then you want to make what you think is a rational decision on whether to do it or not. Well, what I've learned from this process is there are people that have ideas that are different from mine that are worth it for me to try without a guaranteed outcome. My thinking is not always the best thinking in the room, and that's helped me also legally. Not just from a recovery, it's helped me in my marriage. It's helped me talk to clients. It's helped me in my law partnership.
Yeah, for sure.
But it requires, there is and I don't mean this in a religious sense, but there is a leap of faith there. And the fundamental part of that leap of faith is I can be okay regardless of the outcome. And that is easy to forget that when we're making decisions that are important, whether it's with I mean, think about, and you've got young children. My young children are grown, so my responsibility is basically done. But those things you think, what if they don't get into this class, or what if they get this teacher instead of that teacher? And what all of us know that have enough wear on our tires, and you are a lot younger than me, but you got enough wear on your tires. I believe you had to have had some things happen different than you wish them to happen, and you're still okay, right? I mean, maybe not exactly what you want, but you did okay not getting that job, not getting into that school, not making this money, not getting this, pick whatever it might be that seemed so important in that moment. And you didn't get it, and you might have been sad, depressed, in tears, whatever way we respond to life's disappointments. And then you got up the next morning, and you put your clothes on, and you went out and you met the world, and it may have taken some time, but that whatever that thing was, it didn't continue to dominate your life in the way that you thought it would.
Yeah.
And that's why I say that getting sober was so helpful to me as a mediator too. And there are lots of good media. I was talking to a group of mediators the other day, and I said, I really like it when people say we need you, Sam. You're the guy we want. But they're saying that to plenty of other people too. And the statistical truth is 98% of all cases settle. And I am not mediating 98% of all cases. So I may make some kind of a difference, but so will whatever mediator who does that job make a difference. And there's a 98% statistical chance that case will settle. Yeah. So, and that part was helpful to me too, that came from getting sober, is that it's not that I'm not unique in some way. I mean, I've got my own genetic makeup, but I'm not more special than anybody else. But there's part of our ego that, like, if somebody tells you that, think, boy, I like hearing that. Maybe I really am special. And what I've learned is that I'm no different than anybody else. It's not, I mean, how many times does someone come talk to you about a problem? It could be personal, could be professional. And after you listen to them and you offer whatever counsel they've said, well, their response is either exactly or in the form of, well, you don't understand. I mean, they are so wed to their problem and whatever way they have of solving it. They really don't want counsel, even though they think they do. They want affirmation for the decision they've already made, because considering how to do something differently is painful. And that's really kind of a place where people that are in recovery get is there is no pain-free option. It is painful to keep drinking, and it is painful to stop drinking.
Yeah.
And we live with what I call option F, and what I talked about some in my book, option F, which is fantasy. I'm in this pain, and surely there ought to be some pain-free option. And what all of us learn who have lived long enough is that there are situations in life which are not pain-free, whether it's physical, psychological, pick it. They're all tied together anyway. So sorry, I'm rambling now.
No, and I think that's a good point, but it just made me think of this is that, when you say that, like, you're not special or whatever, but then, and you're further removed from it, but was there a time that you felt an anger or jealousy towards people who could drink and not and be able to, like, oh, I'll have a beer or a glass of wine and then just stop? And then did you have that feeling like, well, why can't I do that? And like anger or jealousy or whatever it may be.
Anger, jealousy are both good words. Rage sometimes. I mean, it's not fair that they can do it and I can't.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would call it actually grief. I mean, I grieved that I'd lost what I thought was nourishing me rather than killing me. Yeah. And that's how off my perception was. But yeah, I would, you see the commercial or the big, I mean, there are drinks that are out now that didn't even exist when I stopped drinking. I mean, and all the craft beers, and they present it so well, and there's the moisture coming down the side of the glass, and it's people, having it when they're at the ball game with their, I mean, marketers are good. I mean, they can hit the fundamental parts of our brain.
Capture a moment.
Absolutely. And I want that moment, but I lived as if that moment could be sustained.
Yes.
Or that I could, I mean, I don't know that it's so different from the diabetic who can't have sugar, or somebody who's going through some kind of other kind of treatment where there are things they simply can't do, not if they want their treatment to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it was, I can't even tell you how long that was. And there are people who have not had a drink as long as me that still have moments when they want to drink. They don't. I mean, some do, some don't, but there are people, and I can't tell you why that obsession was lifted from me. And when I say was lifted, I don't see recovery as some this great act of willpower or something to be proud of. I mean, the statistics are way more people who have alcohol and addiction problems continue to have alcohol and addiction problems than don't. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you why people that did what seemed to be the same things I did died drunk, and I didn't. So I don't mean that there isn't an element of participation in that process, and it's a complete 300 or 180 degree shift in mindset. But I can't tell you, when somebody comes in the door that wants help, I don't know who's going to be sober in 5 years and who's not. Yeah. It has nothing to do, as far as I can tell, with whether they went to an Ivy League school or whether they're unemployed. And yet we kind of worship at that altar of intellect or accomplishment or money or whatever it is. And this has been one of the things that helped me stop worshiping those things, at least as much as I used to. I'd like to tell you that I completely gotten rid of that, but I no longer have rage anymore, because that practice of looking through the glass, through the bottle, what's going to happen, that's simply a price I can't pay. Yeah. I mean, those people have a different disposition than I do, and they might even be able to drink to excess and get pretty buzzed or even drunk, and it's not what they do all the time. It doesn't affect their lives. They don't drive drunk. They don't hurt their family. So I don't judge anybody who maybe even decides Friday night's my night to get drunk. Well, they have every right to get drunk if they want to. Yeah. I'm not here to tell them that they can't. I just know I can't if I want to live a life and have the life I have. Yeah.
And I'm backtracking a little bit, but you'd mentioned, your kids are grown now, and they were very little, when you got sober, and you're very open about everything. So I imagine you're very open with your children about, your journey, but from your conversations, do they have any recollection of, drinking dad versus dad now?
Only from the videos.
Oh God.
And what they
those have to be hard for you.
I don't watch them. I leave the room. If they're watching the videos when they're little, I leave the room. I can't watch it. It's just too horrible. Yeah. The answer is yes, but they don't really remember the drinking. They remember the recovery. For instance, we used to have people to our house that were other alcoholics, and they'd come and we'd sit around and talk about alcoholism and recovery. What they remember, in fact, I'll send it to you when we finish this. My youngest daughter is a poet. And she remembers very vividly what it was like to be home when these mostly men were downstairs, and my wife would kind of corral the girls after they come back from volleyball or a school show or something and get them upstairs. So we came a long way, and recovery became part of our household. So like when, people were going through divorces and they couldn't talk to each other and they'd have to exchange kids, our house would be the house they'd do that. And we would, and that people would call at all times. And I don't, and so I'd take the call. If it was an alcoholic, I might not take a client call in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. But if it's an alcoholic calling that might drink, I take that call. And so they know that. In fact, my youngest daughter, after she graduated from after she graduated from college, went and worked in an outdoor wilderness recovery program in North Carolina for 2 years, where she'd go out for 10 days in the wilderness with 18 to 28-year-old, mostly heroin addicts, many of whom died. Addiction is a brutal disease. And if we don't, that self-deception piece again, I know I keep saying, is we can say, well, I'm not going to die from it today. But, how many times you read in the paper, the drunk driving the car makes a left-hand turn in front of the semi-tractor trailer and the passenger gets killed, not the drunk.
Right.
And it's that person did not get up that morning planning that. They were deluded into thinking, well, maybe I even drive a little better when I'm drunk. I pay more attention. You've probably heard people say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the rage, it was present all the time. I was, and I think back and how hard it must have been to live with me. I went from docile drunk to sober know-it-all. It makes me cringe to think both who I was drunk and who I was in early sobriety. And you know what? Even today, I cringe sometimes with there are times, speaking of recovery, it happened, I don't know, a few months ago, where I said something to my wife, Patty, and we weren't having an angry conversation. It was recalling something or something. And I just saw almost like the blood drain out of her face. And she said, that takes me back to the way I felt 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So the idea that when I get sober, that I get to control how long, if ever, she gets over the hurt that I caused, I don't get to decide that. That is hers. I don't get to decide how long I pay the price for that. And because what I think is, all I know is the price I paid. I don't know what price she paid.
Yeah.
And it's easy for me to discount that or think, well, that was 27 years ago. It's time for you to be over that. She had her experience, and she gets to have her pain, and she gets to have her recovery.
So, we're almost out of time, but I didn't want to wrap up without talking about advice or, and not necessarily advice, because I know you don't want to tell anyone what to do, but if there's someone listening, and that some of what you're saying may resonate with them, do you have any words of wisdom or, thoughts on to that person?
Yeah, I would say there are very few people who get better on their own, that simply think their way out of addiction. And we were talking earlier about, Googling on your phone. Almost every community has an addiction unit at the hospital, at the local hospital. And there are people there that can tell you different recovery programs, from inpatient 5-day detoxes that are often free at the hospital if you don't have insurance, to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings that are almost everywhere in the world, to recovery programs that are inpatient. Some are fancy, some are not. There are ones that are free, and there are ones that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the first thing I would say is, if you think you got a problem, call somebody else. Mm-hmm. And the second thing I would say is, if you are like many of us, your first response will be to be defensive and say, well, that's not me. Yeah. You're different from me. And so those are the two things I would say. And the third one I would say is, if you take that next step and have a cup of coffee, or show up at the hospital, or show up at some kind of a meeting of some sort, is take one thing that the people there suggest and do it. Mm-hmm. Just take what you think it makes no sense at all. Just do it. And you may decide, I'm not an alcoholic. You may decide, well, I need something different. You might make a new friend who you spend time with, and it may not be your time to stop drinking or using or whatever it might be. But the biggest part is not to think. There are so many old tropes that some people like and some people don't. But the idea that you don't you don't think your way to good living, you live your way to good thinking.
Mhm.
And I find in recovery program, what really felt like it saved me was they didn't tell me how to think, they told me what to do. And that first choice I could make is what I'm choosing to do isn't working. I'm going to do what they tell me. It likely won't kill me. So that's what I'd say. And the other thing I would say is, I don't know who listens to this and where, and even though I don't talk specifically about a recovery program here, I'm happy to talk to anybody that wants to talk to me. My email address is sardery, ARDERY @lawbr.com. If you email me and tell me you want to talk about an addiction issue, I'm happy to talk to you about that. And if I get your email, I'll respond to it. If not, you can call me at my office, which is also public. So I will take that call, I will take that email, and I will talk to you specifically. And I'm not claiming that, that I can save somebody from their disease, and I believe it's a disease. Not everybody does, but I can share my experience and I can share what worked for me, and then somebody else can choose whether they want to give that a try or not. And I've got no judgment if people don't. I wish them well, and I don't try to tell anybody what to do. I can say this worked, this didn't work. This is a suggestion I would have, and you can choose whether you want that suggestion or not.
And, and you take that approach because from going through your own recovery process, you probably wouldn't have responded if someone told you to, Sam, this is what you need to do. You probably would have said, F you, I'm going to do what the hell I want, and maybe move in the opposite direction, right?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like that therapist, though, that talks so directly to me. I think that there are lots of different ways. There are lots of skillful ways to talk to people. Whether you're talking to a jury or whether you're talking, you talk probably different to your spouse than you talk to your best friend. There are different, you start to realize the ways people can hear. So there are some people, I've been just as direct as you said with some people, but the relationship has usually gotten to a different place. Or if somebody is on the brink of death, if they don't do something, then I will talk with way more energy than I'm speaking right now. This is a deadly disease. I believe you will be dead in the next week if you don't do something different. Here's what I would suggest you do, and I will take you there. Now, if they say no, I'm not going to throw them over the shoulder and throw them in my car. But there are circumstances that call for that kind of direct, unvarnished kind of energy. There are other times where if you did that, the people would either say that or they'd curl up in such a quivering heap that they couldn't hear you anyway. What they need is an arm around them and a hug. When I remember the first time somebody said to me, Sam, we're going to love you until you learn to love yourself. Oh. Yeah. Hardly anybody that is an addict or recovering alcoholic likes themselves very well. They have all kinds of ways they shield that, and they even lie to themselves about it. But the idea that you could start disclosing some of the most awful things you've done, and people don't get up and leave. They sit there right with you. They'll listen to you. They'll talk to you. They'll help you if you want help. It's really, recovery can be an extraordinary process, but this is kind of the good part of it. It also hurts like hell. It is really, really hard. You are making a decision every day, not how to get out of pain, but which pain you're going to choose. And I don't know many people that volunteer for that duty. Some of us just have it. But there again, that does not make alcoholics special. People have all kinds of life circumstances with their marriage, their children, their health circumstances, their families that are that way. They're getting up and saying, I have no pain-free decision. My child is suffering. My parents going through this. I've got to decide whether to put them in a nursing home or not. Those are not pain-free decisions. And what recovery gave me is a way to address some of those things in a healthier way. And it didn't apply for me just to getting sober. After I stopped drinking, it gave me a different way to live.
Yeah, I think, the fact that, when you stopped drinking, that's when, a month later you had your first mediation. It was kind of like a career shift for you. And I don't know, talking to you and knowing how you go through mediations, I feel like your recovery process has really aided your mediation strategy to make it that much more successful and effective for you. At least that's my impression. Like, I feel like it made you who you are now, and it carved out your new successes.
On my good days.
Well, I think you had to dive into a lot of self-reflection, and I think that self-reflection has allowed you to come into your role as a mediator, and you have a good perspective on how people think and how they operate, and you can kind of utilize your own self-reflection to navigate the mediation process. That's how I see it, at least.
Well, I'll remember that, because that makes me feel better. But what you just said there is really important about the self-reflection piece, because there is not a bright line distinction necessarily between self-reflection and self-absorption. And sometimes we are not the best judge of it. So when I'm drinking, I'm totally self-absorbed. There's not self-reflection. There's a lot of self-pity. There's I'm the victim, all those things. And then as I got better and the alcohol was out of my system and people helped me, then I learned a little bit more what self-reflection looked like. Now, having said that, the fact that I'm 27 years sober and I've done 4,000 mediations does not mean I'm not fully capable of self-absorption. My ego is ever present. And when that mediation gets toward the end of its third day and it's not getting done, and I'm thinking, well, I'm mediating this case. This case gets done because I settle cases. Well, what a bunch of horse manure. Most cases I mediate because that's true, or mediate, settle because that's true in most cases. But that fine line between self-reflection and self-absorption is a really important one. And so having people in your lives that certainly don't have to be alcoholics that will tell you the truth, say, okay, Sam, you've just gotten way beyond self-reflection and you're thinking only about you right now and it's not doing you or anybody else any good. Those are important friends to have that will still say with you after you've yelled at them that you disagree. But that's why I say, and I forget who my friend is I first heard say this, Sam, you're a garden variety alcoholic. And he didn't mean it in a bad way, but it's nice to be part of and think you got to be better than everybody all the time. I'm a garden variety human being. I'm a garden variety mediator. There are cases I mediate that settle, and cases that other people, if they mediate, they might settle better or differently, or that I don't settle. I mean, remembering that I'm garden variety, it's like, I think it was C.S. Lewis that said, true humility isn't being right-sized. It's when you're not thinking about yourself at all. And that's when I find mediation or friendship is at its very best, is when you're so engaged with that other person and what's going on that you're not thinking about yourself at all. What a relief to not be thinking about yourself.
Yeah. It's like, I think that's a perfect way to put it. Like, and also just being less self-consumed, and when you're not thinking about what other people are thinking about you, or, what they might, I think it gives you a nice little peace.
Yeah, it can, and it, however short or long it lasts. I mean, it never lasts forever, but whatever little piece we can get, we need to be grateful for. I agree.
Well, Sam, I appreciate you so much coming on and talking about your journey and being so open and honest about your struggles and everything. And I really encourage anyone listening and tuning in to take your invitation and to reach out to you if they have any questions, or they just want to share some of their personal, anything personal going on with you. I'm volunteering you for it, but you kind of volunteered yourself.
I did. And I check my email multiple times a day. So you may not get a response right away, but you'll get a response.
But, and of course, if you're looking for an amazing mediator, you know where to find Sam as well. But that was not the focus of today's discussion. But as always, it's a pleasure having you on. I truly appreciate your insight and your wisdom and just the conversation I always get to have with you. So thank you for that.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Megan.
And for everyone listening, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to the Defense Never Rests on Apple Podcasts. And you can also find us on YouTube at TDNR Podcast. Thank you. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me back. How are you doing?
Good. I mean, fine. Well, it's funny because this weekend is on Sunday is my husband's 1 year.
Sobriety date?
Yes. And it's causing me a lot of anxiety because I don't know how to approach it. So, and I'm like, I know I feel like I need to approach it somehow. And if I don't approach it, he's going to be mad. But if I do something, he's going to be mad. So I'm just kind of sitting here in the middle, not knowing what to do.
So you're still dancing around the tornado.
Yes, very much. Very, very much.
I wish there were an easy answer for that, but but it's those are hard things. I mean, maybe you don't need to do anything. I mean, it's his sobriety date.
Yeah, I mean, we already have something unrelated. We have something planned for our kids that night. We're going to some YouTuber thing. So there's already something we're doing, but I just don't know. I'm like, do I get a card? Like, I don't know what to do. So I'm just.
Well, I mean, people have different ways of doing it, so I wouldn't begin to tell you what to do or not do. But what we tend to do is we just acknowledge it with the people we care about. We don't want to make a big deal out of it because there's no guarantee that it continues the next day until the next day is over.
Yeah.
And so, but different people have different traditions. So if you need to get a card, you need to get a card. And I would just encourage you not to feel like you need to be over the top excited or positive, or I mean, just I mean, it could be something as simple as you wake up in the morning and say, I'm glad you're sober. I mean, whatever feels most genuine to you, that's not designed to control a response, but just a genuine sharing of where you are.
Yeah. I mean, I think my struggle is the way he got there was such a contentious process that it's also, there's a lot of negative things around that day too. So that's
Yeah.
why it's like a little bit of eggshells, but
Yeah. Well, and you know, as we talked about, nothing stays the same. I mean, my guess is it's different today, or will be different Sunday than it was a year ago Sunday, and it's been different lots of days in between that. Among the biggest challenges for me still is because most days are pretty good. I mean, like I said, I don't behave any better than other human beings. And I still have frustration and fear and all those things that go along with the jobs we have that have a fair amount of stress. But I will tend to think the way things are happening now is the way they will always be. I mean, if it's going bad, I'm thinking, why in the hell am I here? I mean, this is so freaking horrible. I just need to be gone. And I'm not saying that's not a good, that could be a perfectly good decision for people. You just don't want to make it in that moment. Because what I'll find is the next moment or the next day changes. Maybe it shouldn't change the decision I made to stay or go or somewhere in between, whatever that is. But it's just, it can tend, my belief is that if people are into recovery in a way that's good for them and those around them, life starts feeling lighter, not heavier. But sometimes in that early recovery, like I talked about, you know, at our house, it was really, it felt heavy all the time. I wasn't drinking anymore, but we're having to deal with the fact that I got plenty of character defects when I'm not drinking, let alone when I am. And in fairness, I mean, Patty's not perfect. She's got her own too. And we've been blending them differently. And then to try to do that, you know, like I said, when I'm the know-it-all, is what a miserable process for her.
yeah. So yeah, we will see how this weekend goes. I'm glad we have another thing going on that day. The 6-month market was very contentious. So
what if you don't mind my asking, what does he do or not do to, I mean, what's his sobriety program like?
He
Doesn't drink.
Yeah, he doesn't have a circle. Like he doesn't talk to anybody about
Does he have
anything.
does he have a therapist?
Not that he sees anymore, and not one that he was ever honest with, to be honest. So
that's hard. I mean,
yeah.
sometimes, I mean, sometimes people refer to that as putting the plug in the jug. But if all you do is put the plug in the jug and you don't make other changes, because it's not just changing not drinking, it's truly changing world. I mean, I truly think I'm a different person. I mean, the way I view the way, and I continued to try cases after I got sober, but I tried them differently. I approached clients differently. My marriage was different. I mean, it was on you know, shaky ground for a long time, but it was different and is different. And so just not, because not drinking is a bigger thing. Almost everybody, we can, like my friend says, let's just call that alcoholism, but it usually starts somewhere. I mean, we drank because we didn't like life, or we were angry, or and I didn't say it today, but you know, if you'd asked me, am I drinking? I would have said, well, if you had my wife, you'd be drunk too. I mean, I would have said that. Nobody else would have thought that, but that was my perception. If you had my wife, it was like it was her fault that I was drunk every day.
Oh yeah, that's what
We'll
he thinks.
God bless
Guaranteed.
you.
That's what.
So what do you do to be okay then?
I mean, I do the things, like I do the therapy, I do all those things to try to help myself.
Yeah.
It's just funny that it's like I'm doing the things, but I'm still walking on eggshells. And because he's not doing any of the work that, from what I understand, is very important, but you know, but then he wants it to the outside to appear very normal. Like for instance, like we just put like new floors in our house. We're doing like a lot of work, and we got rid of basically we got rid of the liquor cabinet that had like all the glassware and had like the booze that was in there was like probably in this house when we bought it. It's like creme de menthe and all this nonsense. And he never wanted me to get rid of the booze, but I was like, who is drinking this? Like, I'm not drinking it. You're like, why are we carrying around 3 bottles of Kahlua from 5 years ago? But so anyway, he buys this like bar cart and he wants to have booze and nice glasses on a bar cart. But I was like, well, why? Because I'm like, I'm not drinking it. You're not. He's like, well, I just want when people come here to feel comfortable that they can drink and they're not going to drink because I'm not drinking. So I feel like that just gives them the perception that it's okay, which I appreciate. But at the same time, I'm like, it's all about the appearance of things. And I was like, in my mind, I'm like, we don't need a bar cart. We
Well,
don't need one.
and maybe it's not okay if people drink there. I mean, and that kind of comes in that line of whether we believe or internalize that it is a deadly disease, either long-term or short-term, and deadly maybe for a marriage or for a job, or not necessarily, maybe not heartbeat dead. And that's why it was such a, and I had nothing to do with it. It was such a gift when Patty told everybody. I mean, there's no hiding it then. I mean, it was, we live in Bloomington, Indiana is, the whole county is about 200,000 people. It's not a big place.
Yeah.
And so we all go to the same Kroger. So it's not like it was going to be a secret at that point. And so because that's just fear and insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not, like I said, I don't wear this on my sleeve, and I probably wouldn't have done a podcast like this 10 years ago. But I just don't care who knows. And if somebody doesn't hire me for that reason, or somebody doesn't want to socialize with Patty and me for that reason, okay, I mean, that's all right. But that's 27 years out, not a year out. But that notion that I'm still, because drinking was a facade.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm still trying to put up a facade after I stop drinking, I mean, the idea is to have some freedom, not to still be trapped.
Yeah.
But you can't, but you're doing what you need to do. I mean, you truly, I mean, you're living it. You're living in that house day in day out. You can take care of you, and that is all you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what you talk about, like that first year and a half, it's like, yeah, that's where I'm in right now. So I can really feel it. And the fact that he's not helping, like he's not doing any of the other stuff to help with the mental part. I think it's making it just more difficult for him. I truly believe he doesn't care about drinking anymore, but it's the underlying stuff that, pushed it to where it was is not getting worked on either. So,
what is his job? What does he do?
He's a CFO.
Okay. So he's gotten a lot of reinforcement based on his thinking and his intellect. He's good with numbers. He's good with organizations. He's making a good living. I mean, all those things. Yeah. And so the idea that you would have to get help from somebody else, that you could, like when I said, you don't think your way to good living, you live your way to good thinking. I mean, a lot of his thinking, he's gotten reinforced. It's really good thinking.
But not this current job and not the one before, the one prior. I mean, he won't ever tell me that he got let go because they knew he was drinking, but I know he got let go because I think they gave him some grace, and they're like, we don't think you're not happy here. We'll give you 6 months to find your replacement. But I think they knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And then the job, and then he was unemployed for like a year. And then the job after that, I think he knew what was going on. And that's the job. My husband left. He went to rehab and then he left. Like he didn't return after he got back from rehab because I think he was embarrassed to go. And I think he left a total mess because that's when he was at the height, like drinking on his way to work, like having the vodka, like a screwdriver in the console of his car. So that was at the very, very height. So he didn't return there because I think he knew there was a giant mess and he was embarrassed. And then was unemployed for 6 months. Now he's in a way, it's good. It's kind of a fresh start, but I think he would never admit that he was struggling at work. And it was because of that, because he's much clearer now. I can even hear it when he's home and he's on calls, and like he's much more level head. I mean, I even see it with the handwriting. I have terrible handwriting. Shaky. Like there was something that he wrote. He was going to like a beer place and he like posted on Instagram like his beer order, and you could barely read his numbers because his hands were shaking so much. And now I've noticed like, oh, your handwriting is like legible. But that, I just think there's like, he's a clear thinker now. And I think the new job is helpful to have like a fresh start with new people who don't know the prior self, I guess. But
right. Right. Well, I wish good things for him. It is enormous after, however old he is. He's got all those years. I mean, and I really appreciated this description somebody gave my time. It's even after you stop drinking, you've still got all those old tapes running in your head. Those are kind of that's the fundamental operating system of the way you work. And if you stop drinking, you don't alter some of those tapes, you've got the old operating system, but without the anesthetic. And in many ways, while you think clearer, life seems so much worse. That's why I talk about living. I mean, I was incapable of living life on life's terms, and I could only live life on life's terms after I stopped drinking with enormous amounts of help.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a little help, it was a lot of help for me. And
Yeah.
I didn't go to an inpatient treatment or anything. For me, it was AA, but I did a lot of AA. And I met some of my dearest friends in the whole world that I've ever had. I mean, it's not just me that answers those phone calls. They will answer my phone calls.
Yeah.
Patty and I were in the middle of just a really ugly time a couple of months ago. And I'm talking to those guys all the time. It's okay. What is it for me not to try to fix her? Because she doesn't think she needs to be fixed, and probably doesn't. It's not an alcohol issue. What can I do to be a loving husband and be present compassionately while she suffers, as opposed to, you need to change because I would feel better. I mean, that poster I use when I give talks. The classic response to conflict is, why don't you change so I'll feel better? Right. And while you would like that from your husband, you're saying, what can I do to feel better and move on the best I can with a circumstance that's not exactly what I would like it to be.
Yeah.
That's hard. That you also don't have a pain-free option.
No.
Unfortunately.
No. But yes, so we're in the thick of it.
God bless you. If there's anything I can do, I mean, if you have just a random phone call, I think you've got my cell number. I mean, I wouldn't claim, as you know, to fix anything, but I'd be happy to chat if you ever need to chat. And I will not call you and bug you with some fancy solution I have, I promise. But if there's anything, I will, if I'll see if I can find that poem my daughter wrote. Yes, about it was about really basically being in a house where AA meetings were going on downtown or downstairs while she was upstairs as a little girl.
Which is, yeah, I mean, and that's part of the reason I asked about your kids, because I mean, my kids are 9 and 7, so and they remember certain things from before, and now they're certainly going to remember now, because it's very every day when we come home, they're like, well, what mood is he going to be in? But before, it was similar. It was just like, is daddy going to be asleep when we get home?
Yeah.
So I hope for them it kind of, evens out, because it's still very volatile. So I'm hoping for their sake it gets less that way, because I don't want them to look back and this is all that they remember, so. Well,
it won't be. It won't. I mean, I think that's what's so hard about being a mother of something when your husband's an alcoholic, is you so want these things for your kids, and they're going to have their own journey.
Yeah.
I mean, even at 7 and 9, they'll remember some things that they didn't like very well, and some things they do. And then they'll get to be adults like my daughters, and then they'll tell you all the shitty things you did, even when you were sober. Which is okay. I mean, that's not all we do. We have good times together, but I think, I mean, the pressure, I think, that the non-drinking spouse with children takes on. I mean, you think about all the stuff you just talked about. You're doing a job. You're doing podcasts. You're walking on eggshells. You're thinking about his sobriety. You want the kids to have a good experience. You're trying to, I'm sure, take care of yourself. And I mean, you've got 2 full-time jobs at least.
Yeah. Yes, my cup is full.
So do you have good friends you talk to, or you have friends you can be really candid with?
Yes,
good.
Thankfully
Good.
I have that. He doesn't, but I do. He's very closed off, and honestly, the friends that we live in the town he grew up in, and he has a lot of friends from growing up that live here, but he doesn't talk to any of them at all. I think because none of them know how to be friends without drinking.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's admitted that to him, but his best friend doesn't ever reach out anymore, because I think he's just like, well,
what do I do?
Yeah. And then my husband is also very socially awkward and stuff too. So he's not going to reach out. So therefore, we don't see them. And then every once in a while, he'll be like, he'll try to blame me for the disconnect. It's not, I can't control that. I can't. But
so did he just outwardly, I mean, was AA ever suggested and he rejected it, or it never came up?
No,
Excuse me.
No, he doesn't really he doesn't believe into the AA concept, but I think it was because the place he went to rehab was very anti-AA. So he, I think, just has that in his mind that it's not for him. But they had their own outpatient treatment stuff that he did when they first came home and was like, this is a waste of time. This is a waste of time. And just like could sign himself out of it as soon as he humanly could. And that was like the end of any sort of treatment. And he never, like, he went to a psychologist for a little while, and he went to a psychiatrist until he just stopped. So now he's no longer taking his, anxiety medication because he won't go back to someone to refill his prescription. So it's like, and he does, I didn't even realize that, like, he doesn't know that I know that he's not taking his medicine anymore, which makes him extra like crazy. But I guess in a way, before he stopped taking his anxiety medicine, that's when he really ramped up drinking. So he's not taking it and he's not drinking. So in his mind, he probably thinks that's a good step. He's just not very easy to be around.
Well, it may be a good step in his mind because he's not drinking, but it's a horrible step for living. I mean, I mean, when I'd still rather be you than him. But
well, yeah, because I know in his head he hates himself, and it's all this projection and all. It takes me a lot of therapy to like go through, like, okay, I know that's not me, it's him. Like, he's just projecting everything that's going on here. Like, I just have to remind myself that all the time.
Yeah, but finding a way to have any equanimity in the middle of that, like when you say when your cup's full, and that's why. And I know a lot of people don't like AA because they think there's such a big religious component to it, but nobody requires you to believe anything in AA.
Yeah.
I mean, they make suggestions, and their God is in there, and for me, there is a spiritual component to it. But I got plenty of friends that aren't. I mean, it's a whole lot of different things. I mean, basically, AA is anarchy because there are no real leaders. I mean, it's truly. I mean, we don't. I've got a friend here in Bloomington who's a sociologist. He said, "Hey, it's nothing but anarchy that works." He said, "There's no better way because you don't have. There's a central office that distributes literature." But like one person said, all you have to do to start a new AA meeting is have a resentment in a coffee pot. It's all it takes. So anyway, well, I'm sorry you're going through all that. I'm glad you're doing stuff to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
If I can ever do anything, let me know. Sometimes I get emails after these things. Sometimes I don't. So will I know when this gets posted?
I will touch base with you probably a day or two before to let you know, and I can send you the promo too if you want to post it on your own networks.
Okay.
And yeah, it's probably the second week of August, I think, is
well. Just if you send me the promo, then I'll post it as well, so people have it out there. If, like I said, if I can do anything else, thanks for having me back twice. It's been delightful getting to know you, Megan. So
same here.
If you probably won't find yourself in Bloomington, Indiana, but if you are, I'd be happy to buy you lunch or dinner or a cup of coffee, and you can meet Patty rather than hearing about her.
Yes, I would like to meet her.
She'd be a good person. She'd be delighted that she doesn't do this, and so, but she would talk to anybody. So if you ever feel like you just want to talk to somebody that went through it, she'd be happy to talk to you.
I appreciate it.
I mean, that is a serious offer because I just talked to her this morning. So actually, I talk to her every morning.
Well, it was a pleasure, Sam. Thank you so much for
You're welcome.
Coming back on, and let's keep in touch.
Continued good luck with those kids and your husband and all this stuff and the many full plates that you're juggling.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Defense Never Rests. I'm your host, Megan Henry, and today I'm joined again by Sam Ardery. We had Sam on about a few months ago to talk about mediations. He has mediated thousands and thousands of cases and does an amazing job. But today, he's on to talk about something totally different. Sam is a recovering alcoholic, and after talking to him after our last podcast, we kind of got into discussing it. And I said, "Hey, would you want to come on and just, share your story?" And he said, "Absolutely." So, today Sam's coming on to share a story. So with that, let's bring him in. All right, thanks, Jonathan.